Good afternoon and greetings from the campus of The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for joining us for this Creative Pathfinders event. My name is Scott Jones, and I have the pleasure of serving the university as a professor of music and as director of the Barnett Center for Integrated Arts and Enterprise. We're delighted to have you with us. Creative Pathfinders is a series of virtual conversations that traces the careers and highlights the accomplishments of Ohio State arts alumni. Initiated in 2020 by then Barnett Center Director Allison Cressetta, Creative Pathfinders celebrate the accomplishments of arts graduates and enrich the relationships with our university alumni population, now more than 600,000 worldwide. The series is a collaboration between the Lawrence and Isabel Barnett Center for Integrated Arts and Enterprise and a specific arts unit or center here at Ohio State, and is supported by the Office of Advancement within the College of Arts and Sciences. Allow me to share with you just briefly a bit about the Barnett Center for those of you who may not be aware of who we are and what we do. Created by a generous gift from the Barnett family, the Barnett Center educates and prepares students for successful careers in the arts and related entrepreneurial fields, while also advancing student understanding of the arts, arts management, policy, and culture through entrepreneurial thought and action. Vibrant partnerships with each of the arts units here at Ohio State, other campus constituents, and the Columbus arts community are central to the mission of the center. The Barnett Center contributes to the curricular offerings focused on arts entrepreneurship and arts management by offering programs, working with students across disciplines, and housing the Barnett Fellows. For more information about the Barnett Center, please feel free to visit our website, barnettcenter.osu.edu. Now, on to the most important part of the afternoon. I'd like to introduce to you the moderator of the event, and that is William Nickley. Will is an assistant professor in the Department of Design here at Ohio State. He holds an MFA in Design and a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Design from The Ohio State University, one of our own. He researches social design practice as a member of the Ohio State Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability Lab and teaches courses in the Industrial Design major. Will's research lies at the intersection of social design, design methods, and community-engaged design. He is currently engaged in a project that includes LGBTQ+ youth in an interdisciplinary research effort to develop training simulations for healthcare providers in order to improve their affirmative care practice. It's part of a $2.7 million grant funded by the Ohio Department of Medicaid. Prior to joining our Department of Design in 2020, Will spent a decade practicing industrial design in consultancy, specializing in the development of consumer goods, and his work has earned several patents and numerous design and industry awards. Please welcome to our conversation, Will Nickley.
Hello, and thank you, Dr. Jones, for the wonderful introduction. Certainly not the most important introduction, though. That's about to happen here. Also, before I get started, thank you again to the Barnett Center for putting on this second series of Creative Pathfinders. I am very excited and privileged to introduce our Pathfinder for today. Rachel Sandoval is an industrial designer, currently a senior product designer for Philips, based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But that's not all. In fact, today we will be talking about her path through as a designer in a number of different positions, ranging from right here in Columbus, Ohio, to Chicago, Hamburg, Germany, Pittsburgh, like I mentioned, in a variety of settings, from consultancies to in-house teams. And I know that she has some advice that will be very impactful for a number of our students, design students, and other emerging creative pathfinders who are entering or have recently entered the field of design or another creative field. So without further ado, welcome, Rachel. We're excited to have you with us for the next 45 minutes or so.
Thank you so much, Will. Again, definitely appreciate everyone for putting this series together and for being a part of it. I definitely did not think I would be lucky enough to come back and then speak to all of the current students and hopefully future students.
All right, and I'm not sure, Dr. Jones, if there's anything else you need to do here, or we can jump right in. All right, we're off and running. So, Rachel, thanks for being with us today. Actually, you and I had a chance to catch up just a couple months ago. We weren't even thinking about Creative Pathfinders, and as I remember it, we started talking about some of the things we'd both been able to do over the last decade or so. You've been out from your time at Ohio State in the very same program that I went through, Industrial Design in the Department of Design, almost 10 years, actually 10 years coming up in a month. So I thought maybe a good place to start would be to just tell us a little bit more about yourself, right? I gave you the LinkedIn version of who you are, and I maybe you can give us a better idea of who you are.
Sure. Well, I just would like to add a little color and a little bit of flair to the LinkedIn version. So I did create a little infographic got going on right here. So essentially, since we're all visual people, I figured it would be nice to kind of show that my pathway was not necessarily linear. Certainly, coming through the school system, we generally tend to think of, you start from your kindergarten all the way through high school and then on to college, and you're on your pathway and it's sort of foundational and you build up from there. First off, I'd like to definitely thank the Ohio State University, because I was not even sure that I would have managed to get into college to begin with if it hadn't been for the Morrell Scholarship, which was a full ride. Which thankfully, opened the doorway for me to be able to come to college and to take all these risks, frankly. A lot of this stuff would not have been possible if I hadn't had the support of the Ohio State University to take a chance on me and to see where I could take my pathway. So because of that scholarship, I came to Ohio State in the first place. I'd never really heard what a Buckeye was to begin with. Mostly I sort of grew up in the Northeast, so Boston, outside of Washington, D.C. So definitely unfamiliar with Buckeyes in general, with football in general. But I quickly learned and sort of acclimated, and it was really great as far as the foundation for me to better understand where I could take my career. I had sort of a few inklings here and there about product development, product design from having done some research on my own when I was in high school through, the Princeton Review, looking through different things like that. I remember there was always a debate in my family of, wouldn't you want to do architecture because you can draw? But, I really wanted to craft my own career, and I did a lot of research into what other pathways there would be, visiting universities and things like that to find out what kind of majors were available. And I should preface by saying that, my family's background is very humble, mostly in the cleaning industry. So there weren't really there wasn't a lot there as far as helping resources to figure out, where you should go, essentially. So as a result, I really took advantage of the opportunity to do a couple internships through Ohio State. So we had really excellent professors there that were able to leverage some of their connections, some of their networking, and I got an internship at Radio Flyer was the first one. So a little red wagon company, which was great because I had definitely a lot of criticisms about the toys that I was growing up with. And I wanted to find out more about the production and how toys are made and what was involved with that. And for them, they really valued the fact that Ohio State has such an excellent research program. And as a result, there was a lot of ethnography. There was a lot of co-creation with children and kind of really figuring out, how do you develop something for not just the child, but also for the parent to have fun. So a lot of interesting things there. And then I went on to do my internship at Beyond Design, which was also great, more of a consultancy setting. I had a lot more exposure to medical products and packaging and things like that. And both internships were in Chicago. So naturally, when I got out of Ohio State, I sort of thought, why not check out what other opportunities are in Chicago? And my first job out was at Radius, as you mentioned before, which is another consultancy. And again, they also really latched on the idea of, it's fantastic that we have someone who has that background in a university that has such great research skills. I remember the Make, See, Do workshop sessions and things like that were very innovative at the time. Not many people were doing co-creation sessions with people who were actually using the products. So that was super helpful as far as getting my foot in the door. But then, as I was there at that particular consultancy, I started to really question, I'm doing excellent work in terms of research, but I'd really like to get into the craft of industrial design. It's sort of what got me interested in the field to begin with, and I felt like I needed to dig deeper there. So that's kind of where I transitioned into what I would say is a smaller company called Contigo that got bought out by Newell Brands. So I was employee number 89 at Contigo. So I really got the feel for what it's like to be in a small company that is really focused on one product category, beverage ware. How do we develop it? How do we get into different channels, whether that's Walmart or Target or whoever, and how do we make sure that it's the best product for the most people, the maximum number of people, mass produced? And how do we make sure that it's fully optimized for that? So it was fantastic as far as really getting into the gritty details of how things are made. Hardware, the finishes, the plastics, the glass, the steel, and then getting into the nuts and bolts of, how much is it going to cost, product cost? How do we make sure that it's going to be a sustainable product in terms of we can keep it on the shelves a long term, and it incentivizes people to not buy plastic water bottles that they can easily get at a vending machine, but something that's going to be durable, that lasts, that they want to use. So as a result, that company did so well in beverage ware that it got bought out by Newell Brands. And with that acquisition, Newell Brands really pumped a lot more resources. So I got to take advantage and spent a couple months really in China, traveling back and forth, really being at the factory level, really understanding, are we talking about big manufacturing equipment? Are we talking about hand labor in terms of taking the parts off or applying decorative finishes? How much extra costs are we adding on by not thinking it through the geometry of that to really simplify it at the factory level? So a lot of those details were incredible as far as, feet on the ground experience about commercialization and production that you just don't get in a lot of companies. Many companies tend to outsource it, don't think twice about it. They're really just focused on the channel strategy or the marketing. But at Contigo and at Newell Brands, I really got the chance to kind of dig my feet deeper into that complexity. Unfortunately, after that project came out that I'd been working on, which was going to be only, I think, a year's worth of a project, it turned into 4 years. It gave me a lot of lessons in terms of how to shepherd a product through from a smaller company to a larger company, how to really sell and pitch that idea internally, and how to make sure that it is able to move across despite the fact that, it's maybe not on time, or maybe it's a little bit more complex than I thought it was going to be originally, or it might require more resources than they originally thought. A lot of that, as far as talking points, were really what I leveraged at that time in the opportunity space. And the product did go to market. I managed to get all that experience. But, unfortunately, as tends to happen with larger companies, they made a lot of acquisitions and sort of realized they needed to scale down. So I was laid off, which is why we've got a little bit of a break here, which is a 6-month break. And I'm so thrilled, for example, that LinkedIn, for example, is acknowledging the fact that, these things happen. Companies tend to have a lot of turnover, a lot of dynamics, and there's nothing to be ashamed about as far as having time off. It helps you really regroup and rethink where you want to take your career, and that's exactly what I did. I took the full 6 months to really think through, where do I want to go next in my career? I had spent a lot of time figuring out the how for hardware, of how physical things are made, and I really wanted to broaden that perspective, go farther out, try to get more international experience, because I really valued that time that I had in China and really getting to know more details about the culture, the experience, the types of negotiations you have to deal with when you're leveraging not just one supplier, but a whole chain of suppliers that are not centrally located, are dispersed all throughout the country. And so I wanted that same level of international experience, because as far as I could tell, most of the companies I'd come across, all of them want to be best in class, but they want to be best in class globally, not just within the domestic US market. So as a result, I really started to push for jobs and applications in internationally. So I had interviews in Australia, I had interviews in all of Europe, I had interviews that I was considering basically anywhere besides the US. Because I really wanted to make sure that I, was pushing my career and taking these risks because, I had that financial cushion from having had that experience at Ohio State. So as a result, I did land a job in Germany, in Hamburg. And it was a fantastic opportunity because it was a HR company that was trying to develop a consulting arm. And they also developed these small contracts where they send out workers or contractors on short term for different companies. So because of that, I got to work at Airbus, working on airplane interiors, which I never would have imagined, having started with a very humble, water bottle or a wagon way back in the day. So as a result of that, I really started to broaden my mind and my perspective as far as where I could take my career. Because I sort of started to realize, professionally, within design, we tend to latch on to specializations, right? You're a 3D artist, or you're the type of person who likes to do motion graphics, or the person who does rendering, you're the person who does illustrations. But when you look at it outside in terms of the business perspective, people tend to just see you as a creative. The barriers to learning a lot of these skills have broken down. You can take 100 tutorials online. There's lots of options as far as learning technical skills. So as a result, you have a lot more flexibility, I think, in your career path than anyone would have realized even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And so I took advantage of that, and I sort of started to really think through, a lot of that research skills that I had developed, that I had honed in from university level into the professional level, those translate really well into digital services. Even within the digital space, there's a lot of questions about what are we making, why are we making it, and who are we making it for? And those skills require interviewing, they require workshopping, they require putting together a strategic plan as far as how are you going to get that information and how you're going to make sure you get it to the right people who are going to be making the thing. So all of that, I think, is really kind of where I would say is the breaking point of my career, in terms of I have the one half about how you make things, how you make a physical thing, how you make a digital thing. And then the second half of my career that I've started now at Philips, I would say, is the second half of it, which is why are we making a thing? What is the goal behind it? Are we chasing an audacious goal? Are we chasing a small goal? And do we think that it's a good idea for the company as a whole, and also for the planet and for everyone else that's involved as far as key stakeholders? So that's kind of I would say, the shorter version of, or the more embellished version of the LinkedIn profile, which I think, is great as far as the bullet points, but there's a lot of richness as far as what I've been building on and why I've been building upon it.
Oh, definitely. And I think that extra context is really helpful. Many of our students, and I'll bring it back to students because I interact with students on a daily basis here, who are trying to imagine themselves in a creative pathway in our field of design, where we get to make things like cute red wagons and water beverage containers, all the way up to Airbus airplanes. Never worked on anything that big myself. That's pretty crazy. And we might get back to the work, but I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned, as I think the word you used was flexibility, right? Your skill set coming through Ohio State, research skills, a nod to the make, say, do method from our very own Dr. Liz Sanders. Flexibility is something that you found your skill set provides you. And it makes me wonder, with flexibility, how are you able to navigate the many different choices that you have along your career path, right? Even the map that you showed us is not a linear one, even though in LinkedIn, we get to see, from 2012 to 2014, she was at Radius, right? If it's not linear, there must be some sort of decision-making process. Do you have a compass? What, if anything, do you come back to help you make these decisions to move every few years, to find that next gig?
Yeah, so I would say, ultimately, especially coming out of, our academic system, we have a tendency to think about careers as sort of a pyramid shape. But I would say, if you look at your career as a design problem, as in you are a person who needs to find the right match, and there's a company out there that also needs to find you, and look at it from the other perspective of the outside in, you can start to see that ultimately career paths are all about how you want to market yourself, how you want to brand yourself, how do you make it easier for people to find you, especially with the accelerating digital services that are out there in the world right now. It may not be an HR person that's looking over your resume. It may not be a design manager. It might not be anyone looking at your website. It might be an algorithm in a database that is scanning through resumes, that is looking for keywords, that's looking for highlights of your career. And then that is your brand. That is how they're finding you. That's how they're filtering through the information. So when you put it in that perspective, it really creates a need for you to think about what risks are you willing to take? What avenues are of interest to you? And how do you find the happy middle ground between what you can provide and what people need in terms of skill sets out there in the world? And that middle ground is so critical.
I definitely see your point there. And again, it's probably something those of us who, and maybe those of us who are older than you and I are, Rachel, who have been out for a while and aren't necessarily thinking about the reality of algorithms as a part of this whole process. But the idea of the personal brand, something that we millennials are really familiar with at this point, is real. And I like how you're talking about thinking about how companies, brands are also looking to find someone that might be a good fit. But I wanted to come back to something here, because the fit that you've described between what you can offer, what you've been able to offer to the companies, the brands you've worked for, and what type of talent they need, what type of skill they need is one that makes sense to me. But I wonder if you could speak a little more to your own personal creative needs, right? Up until this point, we've been talking very, very much about your professional creative pathway, right? We've talked about those companies you've gone to design for, and maybe you can give us a little bit more of a window into how your own personal creativity plays a role in your pathway, if there is a role there. And I suppose maybe one place I saw this might be a fun thing for folks to check out after the fact, would be like even looking through some of the sketches that you have on your personal website, right? Of course, we see water bottles and tents and Tamagotchis and other things, but there's some personality in there too, right? Like I wrote down, I see fish and pixelated cats and honeybees and like some other kind of fun stuff that's in there along the way. So I have a feeling there's another personal connection here. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I would say, a lot of my inspiration or my interest as far as creativity goes, it's really comes down to the human level. So, I am the second generation. So I have a first generation family that comes from a different country, comes from a different background, from a different culture. And I've sort of been really interested in kind of finding a little bit more about what life is like outside of what I have as day-to-day living. So there's a profound curiosity I have about what people do and why do they do it. You think about the routines and the habits you have in your everyday life, and you don't think twice about it. Honestly, you do it automatically because your brain only has so much energy and capacity throughout the day. And I think those are the things that are the most interesting. Like I sort of tend to see the world a little bit more as like a fishbowl, and that you should find delight and joy in what everyone else is doing, in the small things, the little things. And if you can apply that across different contexts globally, you really have a very powerful perspective on what might be coming, what's interesting, what are new tools and resources that we should be thinking about. This is partially the reason, again, why I also really pushed for applying to jobs internationally. And I landed the job in Germany, and it was attractive to me because I really wanted to have the experience of what it's like to join a country where English is not the primary language, where you really have to force yourself to learn on your feet. I did not take a single German course until I arrived in the country, and I wanted to see how far it could take me. And that curiosity, that need to just push yourself, push your limits as far as what your understanding is of other people, I think is core to being a great designer, honestly, is having that empathy, not just for the people who are using your product, but also we tend to lose sight of people internally. So people within a consultancy or within a business, they also have needs and desires and ambitions about where they want to take the company, or where they want to take their vision for the planet or other people and things like that. And I think having that empathy, having that core skill set of just being curious and wanting to dive deeper into those dialogues is so important to finding inspiration. I remember I was working on a French fry project when I was in consulting. And they wanted to redesign the box that you put your French fries into, that you ship off to, Walt Disney World or McDonald's or things like that. And we interviewed everyone. We interviewed the warehouse people. We interviewed the people who grow the potatoes. We interviewed the people who work the machines. We interviewed the people who are at the store level, who put the box and the French fries into the refrigerator. And, we talked to all of those people, and they all had, little bits and pieces of things. But honestly, the most fascinating part came at the very end of the journey of the package, which was talking to the person who, is doing this as a Saturday night job because they want some extra cash. And, they really don't have that much time to think about it because they're planning their date that they're going to have later when they're done with their shift. So they're just shoving the boxes into the refrigerator. And frankly, the refrigerator, might not be in the best shape. They don't really have time to stuff the French fries in a nice organized way. So they might shove the box in there. Or they might take the packages out and shove it into the refrigerator. And at the end of the day, when the next person comes in, the next shift worker, they're looking at all of these packages. They can't tell which is frozen peas and which one is French fries because they look the same. They're all brown. They're all in the same kind of packaging. And at the end of the day, the most insightful thing we got from that was, if you added a cartoon of a little French fry guy on there, so I knew it was a package of French fries, that's perfect. That is ideal for us so that we don't have to waste extra time trying to open up the packages to figure out, is it frozen peas or is it French fries?
What a great example. And I mean, I see it's relating to a lot of what you're saying about curiosity, right? Even if curiosity drove you to go outside the US, take this job abroad, learn German after you get there, it's also curiosity, it sounds like, that helps feed into your design process, your process of investigating human situations on the path to redesigning a box for potatoes, right? And yeah, that is very interesting. I think I want to go back to something else related to curiosity. And when you were talking to just now about, making this dive into Germany, right? A foreign country with a foreign language, something you didn't speak already. Like to me, that seems scary, right? That seems scary, and it relates to something you spoke about earlier, like risk associated with making these big decisions, these big career impacting decisions. And like, how does that play out for you when you have this curiosity and there's this opportunity sitting in front of you to make a change to your pathway? What goes through your head? Is it a regimented a Gantt chart of pros and cons, or is it more of an intuition thing for you? Does it just come back to curiosity? Help me understand that decision-making process.
Yeah, no, so I think one of the wonderful things about our industry in general is that it's very forward focused, it's very future focused. So as a result, I love digging deep into different podcasts or articles, or having conversations with people who are technologists or on other creative pathways, and what I love to dig deep into, find out from them ultimately, is where do they think we're going, and why are we going in that direction as a country, as a population, as a human species. And also having that forward future focus kind of really pushes you to think about, okay, well, at the end of the day, if I take this leap, do I think that the social signals that I'm getting from this are the right kind of signals that I'm going to need to get that AI algorithm that's looking through my resume or looking through my career to notice me, to pay attention? Because, at the end of the day, we are in a very privileged position, and that we're in a country that is very well off and that is, very prosperous. And as a result, we tend to have a lot of people that come in the door, but we need a way to kind of funnel them into the right door, right? So part of that is helping people out by making it very obvious and making it very clear about what your interests are, where your passions are, what are the things that you not necessarily are just passionate about, but also what are you willing to put up with? I think that's the other half of this that we tend to always ignore is, there's a level of patience, there's a level of persistence, there's a level of determination and endurance that comes with someone who, has got their eye on a North Star and is willing to do all the smaller steps, all the grind, the tediousness that might come along with that because they're inspired by that North Star. So I think that's kind of the best way to kind of funnel through whether a leap is worth taking is ultimately whether it's right or appropriate for you and your context and your background. There's a lot of hustle culture as well in design, which I love and I think is definitely important. There's a nice balance between hustle and flow that you definitely need to get those creative inspirations going. But I also think, we have a tendency to kind of dismiss the need for a recharge. And the recharge is critical because the recharge gives you a chance to reflect, to think through, those nights that I spent grinding away at particular tasks. Was I at my happiest moment? Did I find inspiration in those moments? Or, did it kind of drag down my mood? Did I feel like I felt, low energy? I wasn't quite into what the particular task was. Those are the critical moments that you really have to think through and reflect on to decide what is the right leap for you in the next phase of your career. Because at the end of the day, we spend 7-8 hours at work. It's a good chunk of time. And it's, definitely well worth it for us to really think through that it's time well spent, the time that you're satisfied with. And I'm so happy that, although it was a tragic event for us to have to go through a pandemic, it did make the country as a whole, I think, really reflect on, are they happy? Are they on the right path? It took all of that effort, all of that great pause for us to kind of sit down and think through, do we have the right systems in place? Do we need to rethink through how we've organized our work-life balance and how we've thought through in terms of our career trajectory? I mean, I think LinkedIn would have never added on the feature of, time off or bereavement time or time that was laid off if it hadn't been for the pandemic, because it sort of made everyone realize, there are moments in your career where you're not going to be working 24/7, where you're going to be shifting focus, and that's totally okay. You need that to be able to figure out what's the next chapter in your career.
I love that you came back to the LinkedIn time off thing. That's something I wanted to circle back to as well, because if I remember correctly, you mentioned that your North Star maybe it has kind of changed, right? The reason you've been pursuing this design thing at one point was you were interested in the craft, right? The what of design. And at some point, right, whether it happened during this gap, the 6-month gap that you were allowed to put into your creative pathway officially on LinkedIn, right? Now it's more about the why for you in design. I'm curious, what does a recharge time look like for you? If it's this important time for us in our careers and we have a chance to take stock, to think about our work-life balance, what was that like for you? What did you do? What didn't you do?
Yeah, so, to be fair, I had sort of had a little bit of foresight that I would likely have some of a bit of a break in between career paths because of, if you're in design in a corporation, you tend to be in a position to find out and overhear conversations and kind of get a feel for how the company's doing and where the company's going. And if there's a restructure coming, you might hear it through the grapevine. So I had some time really to build a little bit of a financial cushion, A, and then B, also I had a lot of documentation. I had a ton of sketches and videos and artifacts, presentations from different projects throughout the years that I had been diligently saving. And, you know, that time of recharge that I had was an excellent opportunity to go through all of that material, really think through what is at the core of each of these projects. What was I trying to achieve with each one? Because at the end of the day, whether you're producing a digital service or you're producing a hard product, a physical hardware product, they both tend to have the same issue at the end of the day, which is that it is a company putting out a hypothesis about what people need or want in their lives, right? And the market is the one that decides whether that is true or not, or if you put it in the right advertising channel or the right retail channel. These are all things that decide whether the digital product or whether it's a physical product is successful or not. But also, you as a designer also come in there with your own intention of, did it achieve what I wanted to achieve, what I wanted to achieve with it? Was it to the right stakeholders? Did I think through the right negotiation tactics as far as who in the room I should have had to push forward, that we needed to have a better strategy as far as channel goes or as far as the financials go? All of that reflection, I think, is critical to, again, better assessing what your own strengths are, what you need to work on, and how you want to advertise yourself as you start to think through what is needed out there in the work marketplace, or also in terms of the marketplace of services and goods and the dynamics of our economy ultimately.
Definitely. I think, taking a quick look at the time here. All right. So I know for a fact when we spoke a few weeks back, there were a few things you wanted to make sure we left some time to touch on. And I think some of these things are probably topics that are really interesting, especially for folks who are just entering the design industry. So I want to jump back to some of those things really quick. Also, I'm going to pause for a second and give everyone a reminder. Maybe this is sort of like a 3, 4, 5-minute warning. Add some of your questions to the Q&A using the features within Zoom. Rachel's already given us a lot to think about, and we've plowed through only half of my questions, and I feel like there's so much to pick up on, but we want to hear what you're interested in as well. So feel free to type away, and we'll get to questions and answers here in another few minutes. So, but back to creative pathway stuff. Rachel, I know one thing you mentioned being passionate about is helping this next generation of young designers. And I know like you've held positions to help coach folks through the housewares competition as a mentor. And you very clearly are aware of your own path and the things that have been helpful to you in that path. You've also mentioned to me things like pay scales and how to interview and stuff. So I want to open this up for you to touch on some of those subjects. What maybe a good way to frame this would be for someone who's about to enter the workforce as an industrial designer, or maybe even more broadly a creative professional. What should they be thinking about? What information do they need to have?
Sure. Yeah. So I think partially the reason why I want to touch on this subject is because I think definitely in the academic system, we go through K through 12 and college with a grade scale. You get an A, a B, or a C, and it correlates very directly to the level of effort you put in. How engaged were you in the classroom? Did you do all of the homework assignments? All of these things. There's a one-to-one correlation. And the reality is it's a nice structured bubble that you grow up in. But once you get out into the workforce, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect that students have when they first get out about understanding that one-to-one correlation does not exist in the workplace. Yeah, the workplace, it absolutely rewards effort and commitment and passion for sure. But you also have to take into account all of the business needs and the business metrics. And especially in design, we have a tendency to think about, oh, well, if I just honed in my craft a little bit more, or if I put in a little bit more effort into learning all these technical skills, or if I, broadened my ability, my leadership, my ability to generate more interviews or pile on more work. It's part of the hustle culture. It's part of the incentive that we have to, want to do good in the world and want to push forward whatever the actual project is. But I think there is a little bit of a disconnect in that you also have to think about the business. You also have to think about, there is a contained box of a company that is, very much tied to the company's performance or the consultancy's financials, projects that are coming in, whether those projects are a full pipeline that's going to be throughout the year, or whether they are a little spotty. It might be, just one or two clients that can see will have continuous work for them throughout the year. Those realities cause a lot of the financial structure to be a little bit messy, maybe a lot messy, if we're really being honest. And as a result, we have a very old school, let's say, incentive for companies to have performance reviews and to tie, your salary and your bonus to what your performance is. But the reality is they have a limited budget. They can only give out so many promotions, so many pay raises, so many leadership positions within a given year, within a given decade, within a given time period within that company structure. And I think, if we were a little bit more honest and a little bit more direct about what that relationship is, there would be a little bit more of an understanding that, we shouldn't be internalizing performance reviews. We shouldn't be internalizing a lot of these critiques or criticisms, or, just general good-natured feedback. Because at the end of the day, you might be getting the feedback because it's partially true. That could be true. But it also could be that, it's not the right time in the company to be investing in a particular skill set that you're really interested in, or things like that. So I think it's really critical, as far as mental health goes, for us all to kind of acknowledge and realize that we need to be a lot more transparent about pay structures and about where you can go and grow in your career. And I am forever grateful to all of the very frank conversations I had with people who were in positions above me that were honest and said, I started earning this much by this age when I got this position. And there is no way I would have ever dreamt or imagined or even thought of negotiating for certain rates if I hadn't known that information ahead of time, from talking to people, from asking people to be my coach, to asking people to be my mentor, from chatting with people, not just within a company, but outside of different companies, to get a better idea of what the landscape is out there. And it is fascinating how much of a messy construct we tend to internalize because we think it's about our own individual effort, when really it's about the bigger system, the bigger landscape, the other players that are happening in that one industry that you're working in. And once you start to open up and realize all the different factors that play into that, I think it takes a lot of pressure off of the individual person. And you start to realize that, you really have to focus on your own wants, your own needs, and whether that is financial or whether that's about, where you want to go and where you want to take your career. At the end of the day, those two things, they might be entirely separate. You might have some tactics that you use for one goal and a different set of tactics for the other goal, and that's totally okay. It has no reflection whatsoever, no bearing on you as an individual, because again, especially in the US, we have a tendency to associate our career with our identity. And sometimes it's not the same thing, and that's totally fine. And I think, there's a lot less anxiety, I think, with students coming out of school if they just take that sort of lesson to heart. And again, pay it forward. So if you do move up in the ranks, please, by all means, be transparent, be honest with everyone else that you then mentor and coach underneath you.
So it does seem like you're giving our students a tangible thing, like go talk to some people, right? Go find a mentor. We try to bring folks like you, right, into our classrooms who are open books, right? They're happy to talk about their compensation, right? Which is kind of taboo to say, especially in a recorded session that's going to be archived forever in the digital archives. I don't know how granular you'd like to be, Rachel, with us today about compensation, but you're right. I've also found those types of benchmarks helpful, and just knowing what what your worth is something that's really hard to grasp, especially for young creatives who have not been out. They have no benchmarks. So, and this is, I think, a pretty good segue. I'll let you off the hook. You don't have to give us numbers if you don't want to right now.
Well, I will throw out there.
Okay, all right.
That I think it's also important to think about when you think about your compensation. So we have, two ways of thinking about it as far as what kind of person you are and what kind of compensation you're looking for.
Sure.
So there is the micro specialist, the hammer nail philosophy where, I really want to be a 3D artist and the best 3D artist out there, or I really want to be a 3D motion graphics person, or I want to be the best illustrator possible. And you hone as deep as you possibly can the one skill set. And you can start to command higher and higher prices with that if you manage to control the amount of time you're spending on those skills versus the amount of money that you're asking for it. There's also the other way of looking at it, which is more, I would say, the Swiss Army knife, or you could even say Subaru, or like a rubber band, where essentially what you're looking at is, I'm not selling myself as being specialized in one individual thing. I'm selling myself as adaptable, as being a Renaissance person, as in I am very good at looking at a broad landscape of different skills and connecting the dots and looking at what we need to be able to accomplish a very complex problem, right? And so both of those skill sets are valued. Both of those skill sets can be a foundation. But what starts to command higher and higher compensation and salary tends to be people who have operational or organizational skills on top of that. So how good are you at your communication skills? Can you clearly command a room? How good are you at leading a team and getting people inspired? How good are you at coaching people? How good are you at dealing with conflict? That happens periodically, not just within consultancies between client and consultant, but also internally within corporations. You have different departments that might war with each other. Are you good at being the diplomat? Are you good at being the peacekeeper? Are you good at dealing with budgets and the finances? These are all what I would say sort of operational skills that you can apply to a broad number of industries, a broad number of things, and they are another layer on top, or I would say almost the cornerstone that either perspectives really need to build upon, right? So whether you're the hammer or whether you're the rubber band, both need to have that layer of the operational built upon it. And that's how you build the second half of your career, really, is you tend to look at later on as you start to build up expertise. Not only do you have expertise, but also what else can you do to drive and move people forward?
Mm-hmm. This is excellent to hear you articulate, and I do see how operational skills are things that someone later in their design career would be maybe even given permission to leverage, right? Leading a team. However, I also question, especially for those creatives who are just entering the workforce, where those come into play, and how, even if they are trained in some of those operational skills, how they can sell themselves. And I might try to work in one of the questions that's come through from the audience here too. One person was asking about if you could add one thing to design education today to better prepare students in 2022 for a future career in your area of industry or in industrial design, commercial design, what would it be? Would it be operational skills? Would it be something else?
To be totally frank, I would definitely add in a finance component. There's a lot to be said for having a critical foundational understanding about, the amount of labor you put in, how much you should charge, how these things turn around in terms of if you have a bigger budget for a project, how do these things get divided up? How do you resource these things? Especially coming out of school, you don't know whether you're going to land a job immediately, whether you're going to be interning, whether you're going to have to be a freelancer.
Mm-hmm.
All of those career paths, at the end of the day, what makes or breaks whether you have enough to continue on is usually how good are you at calculating the amount of effort you put in versus what kind of compensation you can get back. And that is a very difficult skill to learn, I think, unless you have the right classroom setting to run through all of the hypotheticals. Because, it usually takes a mentor, someone who's been through it, to walk you through all of the smaller things you might have not thought about in terms of logistics. Driving your car to the project site, that'll cost you gas. You have to account that in. The taxes you're gonna have to pay later on, you also have to account for that later on. If you wanna build in some break time because you wanna go back and relearn some skills, you wanna have a time to maybe pivot where you wanna go in your career, you need to plan for that. And that kind of planning, it really, I think it's best taught in the classroom setting, because you don't wanna be out in the real world doing this by trial and error. That's not the best scenario.
Well, it gets back to our conversation about risk, right? And and maybe guts too. Like how confident are you that you can bill out for $75 an hour for a skill that you've never actually employed before in a professional context? Who can say? One question that I've been getting actually quite a lot in the last few weeks, and this is again maybe a bit more granular. So several of our fourth year students, folks that are about to graduate, enter the job market, are getting offers, right? Getting job offers. And one thing that we're talking about more and more is compensation. Of course, there's a monetary component. There are other components, and negotiation, right? What should that process look like? And it relates to things that we're talking about, like knowing your value and how to sell yourself, right? This personal brand, and knowing what the company is looking for, et cetera. Do you have any wisdom for a graduating senior in 2022 about, I don't know, it could be something as simple as what should their baseline be for an hourly wage, or how should you enter a negotiation mindset with a potential employer?
Yeah, so I would say, especially coming out of school, you really have to evaluate what are you hoping to achieve with the opportunity versus how much they're offering you. We run the risk of undervaluing ourselves in the same way that, for example, the fashion industry is notorious for having unpaid interns. You really have to sort of think through, no matter how great the opportunity might look like in the short term, in the long term, are you going to cause an issue as far as knowing where to evaluate yourself in terms of your skill sets? Or is this the right opportunity that's going to open doors and therefore you're willing to take a little bit of a hit? I will give you a great example. I left the US and I went to Hamburg knowing that I would be taking what would likely be a 30%, 40% pay cut from what I could have asked for in the US. For me, it was a good enough gamble because it was an opportunity to really make my resume and my portfolio distinct. Not only in terms of getting a new skill set in terms of digital experiences, but also having that international experience really jumps out, especially, again, considering that your resume not be looked at by a person. It might be a robot, it might be an AI algorithm at the end of the day. So those kinds of things are the trade-offs you really have to think about as you're kind of working through job opportunities. And again, I would really encourage people to also look at the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have a nice little breakdown of what is likely to be the growth plan for particular jobs, especially industrial design, and what the average salary is, to just kind of give you a baseline. And you can break it down by region as well. So if you want to better understand how much you should be asking for or where you're valued at, great data point to start out with. And again, I want to reiterate, if you're taking not necessarily a linear pathway, if you're taking, let's say, a lateral move in career paths where you want to branch off into a different subspecialty, you also have to think about the fact that you might be able to push for a higher compensation if you can show other transferable skills, like being able to lead a workshop, being able to have great communication skills, having the ability to deal with a budget that other people might not want to deal with. Those are transferable skills that might get you the compensation level that you're looking for. Coming right out of school where you're still fresh and still wanting people to take a chance on you, you should leverage the fact that you have the maximum amount of time to change paths and pivot in your career. And people expect you to do this in your career this early on. So take advantage, be flexible, be adaptable, see what's out there, try stuff out. Trial and error is the core part of this time in your life.
I think that's a great place to leave it for advice for our graduating students. And I know we're closing in on our end time. I see Dr. Jones has reappeared. So I wanted to see if we could squeeze in one other light question for you, Rachel, before we thank you. And then I'll bother you for the next, several months with more questions via email or something. What inspires you today that is different from when you were in school, right? Now that you're 10 years into this creative pathway, at least from school, what is it? What is it that inspires you today?
So when I was a student, you have the tendency to look at all the amazing products that are out in the field. So Apple products versus an Android product and why one is better than the other. But, recently I started to realize the real insights come from the product failures, not the leaders in the market, but the products that are not doing well. Why did the Motorola Razr not stand up against the iPhone? Those are really good questions and insights to learn from is, what did not do well? Those are the things that are really going to jumpstart and have you thinking on a bigger scale as far as where you should take the vision or the hypothesis of your project.
I love it. You're bringing it back to curiosity once again. So looking at the failures, I think that's a great piece of advice. Well, I know we're just about out of time, and I wanted to thank you again, Rachel, for taking time out of your busy week, all the things happening right now at Phillips, and for sharing your creative pathway, or at least small part of it with us here today. So thanks again to Dr. Jones and the Barnett Center, and any final thoughts before we hand things back over to Dr. Jones?
I will just wrap up our time here together by saying, on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences and the Barnett Center, all of us gathered here today, Rachel, thank you. We're so proud to call you one of our own. And to Will, a delight to have you as moderator for this session. Thanks for all that you're doing for our students here at the university too. For all of you who've tuned in to watch, thank you so much for being with us. As we like to say in the College of Arts and Sciences, be well and stay close to the arts. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.